Okay, everyone, this is lesson 11, interpreting hypothesis tests. The red and the blue information is most important to write down. This is going to be your last lesson for our probability and statistics unit this year. Some vocab. You may have already gone over this in the previous lesson, but it is still important for you to know and write down if you may have forgotten any of the information. Remember, the H sub O is your null, H sub A is the alternate, the lowercase p is your p-value, and you have alpha, your significance level. One of the things to remember is to reject the null if the p-value is less than alpha. And we do have an acronym that we do use with this sometimes to help us remember. This acronym player says that if the p-value is less than alpha, yes, you want to go ahead and reject the null hypothesis. Outline of what's going on in our lesson. We're going to eventually get down to the interpreting the conclusion parts. So what are some limits? We cannot prove the H sub O, the null, to be true. We have to assume that it's true and look for evidence. At the very best, we can conclude our data is consistent. Likewise, if we cannot prove the H sub A to be false, we conclude that our data isn't strong enough to show that the alternate is true. So moving on, these two things in blue are very important. If you're going to prove something to be false, you make it the null. If you're going to prove something to be true, you make it the alternate. Remember, the H sub O, the null, is always using some form of an equals. Sometimes we have to adjust information in order for us to describe and get that hypothesis that we really need for the problem. And we'll talk about that in a couple examples. So the first example, I'll let you go ahead and read through that. So remember to pause the video as necessary. So hopefully you have understood that at the beginning we have a claim that the delivery time is less than 30 minutes. Selection of 36 deliveries, an average of 29.1 minutes, a standard D of 3.5 minutes, and our job is to determine, is this enough evidence to support the claim at a 1% significance level? If we are trying to support the claim, we want to talk about the alternates. So from our claim, if it says is less than, then we have the alternate given to us, and we're going to go ahead and use that if we're trying to support. So we have our claim as the alternate being smaller than 30. Remember a few of the things that we're trying to do here as we go through. Trying to support the claim to make it the H sub A. We're going to reject the claim if we want to make it the H sub O. So if we have the alternate that we know and given based off of supporting, then we would know that H sub O, mu, has to be bigger than or equal to 30 because it is really the opposites. Okay, so from the example problem that we looked at just a minute ago, these were the pieces of information that you should be writing down as you read the word problem. Our claim, since we were supporting, was the H sub A, smaller than 30. The H sub O, the null, was bigger than or equal to 30. We had an alpha level of 0.01. We had our average. We had our standard deviation, and we had the number of 36, our deliveries. So we want to use our calculator just like you did in the previous lesson. You want to go ahead in and enter us into the stats position. Remember, this down here needs to represent the alternate, which is why it's the less than. So just a quick review if you've forgotten how to do this in your calculator. You want to go into stats, cursor over to tests, go to t-test number 2, make sure you're on stats, enter your information incorrectly with your H sub A, and then eventually go down to calculate. Because what you're interested in need is the p-value. So in this particular problem, you have a p-value when rounded to 4 places, 0.0659, and you have alpha 0.01. Your p-value is not less than alpha. So what we have to then say is we fail to reject. We fail to reject that the p-value is not less than alpha. So what are some conclusions? Rejecting the null hypothesis, we can conclude that the H sub O is false and the H sub A is true. If we fail to reject the null, we do not have enough evidence to reject the H sub O or demonstrate that the H sub A is true. And these are not equivalent. Rejecting and failing to reject are not equivalent statements. So rejecting the null hypothesis is powerful. So if I told you that your intro to pre-calc teachers were going to dunk on you in a basketball game, rejecting that would be pretty powerful. When you reject the null, you make a statement. You say that the null is false and the alternate is true. So I guess you're saying that your intro to pre-calc teachers are not dunking on you. Failing to reject is much less powerful, though. Here are some things for you to read. And down at the end, your best conclusion in the end, sort of like Jackson lunches. Here's an important chart for you to write down. If your claim is the alternate, as it was in the previous problem, and you reject the null, there is enough evidence to support the claim. If your claim is the alternate and you fail to reject the null, then there is not enough evidence to support the claim. But what if you have the null as your claim and you reject? Then there is enough evidence to reject that claim. And what if you have the null as your claim and you fail to reject that null? Then you would say there is not enough evidence to reject the claim. So notice, if the null is your claim, you either say there is or there is not enough evidence to reject. If the alternate is your claim, then you say there is enough to support or there is not enough to support. So make sure that you write that chart down. So back in the problem that we just finished on our calculator, we said the p-value is not less than alpha. So we had to say that we failed to reject. Since our claim was the H sub A, we then go ahead and describe that there is not enough evidence to support the claim that was given, that the mean delivery time is less than 30 minutes. So here's another example. I'll go ahead and let you read this one as well. Okay, so you have AAA claiming there is less than $118, and then they gave you the other information in the problem and in the end. Once again, just like we did in the previous lesson, if the population is normally distributed, that we want to say is the sample size has to be smaller than 30. So that's important that we put that in there, because we only have a sample of 11. Now, what's very important here to read is in the end, we want to know, is there enough evidence to reject the claim at a 5% significance level? Now remember, if you're dealing with rejection, you're talking about an H sub O. So does this represent our H sub O if it says is less than? No. So this is where we have to make sure we're very careful in understanding how to use the chart and read what the question is asking you in the end. So the claim originally that they gave you was mu was smaller than 118, but we are trying to prove this false. We're trying to question this. So we really need to make this the H sub O. If we are rejecting, we need to make this our H sub O. So we have to manipulate the claim and say that the H sub O mu is less than or equal to 118. Since mu is less than or equal to 118, we need to say that the alternate mu is bigger than 118. In your assignment, you just have to be careful. Read what is asked. Make sure you take care of the chart to know what you're going to have to do with what you thought might be the claim. You have to be very careful. If it's directly stated for you in the assignment, then you just go ahead and correct the answer based off of the specific information that is given. But you do have to be careful in certain questions on your assignment. And this kind of went back to the screen we looked at before just to kind of help you out. If you're trying to prove something false, we want to make that the null. So that's why we had to do that. If you want to prove something true, you want to make it the alternate. So hopefully you wrote down everything that you needed to be able to use your calculator. So once again, the claim really, because we were trying to reject, is mu is less than or equal to 118. You have your alpha significance level, you have your data. Remember, H sub A is what needs to be put into your calculator correctly. So if you're having any trouble with your calculator, make sure that you see us for some help before you do the assignment. So after using your calculator, did you find your p-value to be very, very small? Remember, this e to the negative 4 means this decimal will move backwards 4 spaces. So 0.0006 is your p-value. Alpha 0.05, p is less than alpha. So remember, if your p-value is less than alpha, yes, you want to go ahead and reject the null. So if you use your chart and you just rejected the null hypothesis, you would be able to say that there is enough evidence to reject the claim. Here are your procedures. Once again, pause the video and write down what you need. And more procedures as well. Here's the chart in case you forgot to write it down. It's also very important, once again, to have this beside you as you're doing your assignments. Another example. Once again, go ahead and push the pause button and read. And find the information and write down everything that you're going to need for your calculator. Okay, so you have a claim that says is or equals 10,460. So if this says is, this is telling you that this is the H sub O because it has to have an equals with it. Hopefully you read through and found the 900, the 10,310, 2540, and 1% significance level. So is this enough to question or reject the Department of Agriculture's claim? So if we are going to question or reject, we need to talk about the H sub O. Since this says is, we are dealing already with the H sub O. So our claim, we're going to go ahead and use as it's given to us. We are trying to reject, question, or prove it to be false. Since we were given the H sub O, that H sub A mu is not equal to 10,460. So if you've used your calculator and you've typed in everything that you need, once again, this is your alternate. Mu is not equal. So make sure that you correctly push this in your calculator with all your other data numbers entered. Did you get a p-value? 0.0768 if you round to 4 places. This p-value is not smaller than 0.01. So what are we going to have to do? We reject the null. No, we failed to do that. Our H sub O was our claim. So if we use our chart and we fail to reject the H sub O, then you would say there is not enough evidence to reject that claim. Once again, you failed to reject the H sub O. If you're failing to reject, you have to use this answer. If we would reject, we would have picked this one. Our last example. Once again, go ahead and read and write down the information, and then we'll go from there to answer in the end, how do we have enough evidence to support the claim? Okay, so in this example, the claim says that the model car gets an average of 43 miles per gallon. So it's going to be equivalent to 43 miles per gallon. So the claim itself looks like mu equals 43. You had 21 cars, 47 miles per gallon. You had a standard deviation at 2% significance level. But our job is to support the claim. So we want to be able to prove it to be true. So if we're going to support or prove it to be true, then we need to be talking about an H sub A. We were not given an H sub A. So we're going to have to go ahead and adjust this a little bit. So what if we say the car gets an average larger than 43 miles per gallon? Well, mu then would be bigger than 43, but this does not include 43. Probably really doesn't matter, but let's go ahead and talk about what if we wanted to allow for rounding. What if mu was bigger than 42.5? Let's go ahead and use this for this particular example problem. So let's use our claim by changing the wording so that your H sub A, since we are trying to support, is mu is bigger than 42.5. Therefore, the alternate, the opposite, H sub O, your mu is going to be less than or equal to 42.5. Then you have your other key pieces of information to type in your calculator. Remember, you need to type in the alternates. So after using your calculator correctly, did you get another very small value where you would be moving this 14 places back to the left? That very small value for P is smaller than alpha. So we want to go ahead and reject. And remember, we said the alternate, since we slightly changed the wording, is the claim. So if we reject the alternate, then we want to say there is enough evidence to support that claim.